Start our YouTube broadcast here, and then I'll give you the formal introduction.
Sounds good.
All right, I want to welcome everybody to our lockdown learning for Friday, April 10th, 2020. I'm going to cancel that spotlight video for a minute. Now I got to cancel. I've got to remember my own advice there and turn off my own speaker so that I'm not looping. So thanks for tuning in today, everybody. We have on our Zoom call today, we've got about 465 people here today, plus we've got people watching live on YouTube. So I love that so many people took the time to tune in today for this meeting. You know, I've said for years, I may not have won the genetic lottery in terms of height or hair, but I did in terms of, I guess, business assertiveness, work ethic, and great examples. And you guys got to hear from my dad a few weeks ago, and my dad and my uncle Scott both grew up working for their father, which is why I never went to work for mine, and why Scott's kids didn't really do that either. And so I got to watch my uncle build a business from scratch, and he's going to tell you his background and his story. Built and sold multiple companies, and now is the CEO at Odylia Therapeutics, which is a biotech nonprofit startup. And I wanted you to hear from somebody who's been successful in a range of businesses. He's going to talk for a bit, and then we're going to do what we have done for the last few meetings here, which is if anybody has questions towards the second half, you can put them into the Zoom chat, and I will unmute some people to ask some questions. So Scott, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. And
you're muted.
I appreciate it. What's that? Okay. Can you still hear me? Good. Okay. Appreciate it. You know, Adam and I are real close as my brother's son, and my best friend in the whole world is Larry, who you met before. Ironically, we started our businesses a month apart in 1984, very different paths. We both started from scratch. He had a couple partners. I went alone. But yeah, I was talking to Adam at the start of all this stuff, and had written a white paper for some of the companies I work with now regarding, you know, downtimes and good times and how to take advantage of certain things. And I just, as we were talking, he said, hey, would you just tell that to some of our people? Because, you know, since 1984, we've been through, you know, everything I'm going to talk about today is through somewhat trial and error. And hopefully it's more the fact that I'm 62 and can tell you what I did wrong and what worked, rather than everything worked right, which we all know is not true. So it always seems to be that way, that you learn through experience, and you know, shame on you if you don't learn through that and take advantage of it. So just as a quick background, I started in 1984 a company called Innotrac, and it was a variety of different thought processes at the time. I was a programmer, computer programmer, and just wanted to do my own thing, and just started with $18,000 that I had saved up. Went out on my own with 2 kids in a house, mortgage payment, and a wife, and went out there and tried to figure out what I was going to do. And had 3 ideas, none of which worked. I kept plugging at it. I had to pay some bills, so I did some contract programming for some people and so for some companies, just to put food on the table for the first few months. And you know, Adam and I talked about a story that I've told in the past, that I'm a big Georgia Bulldog fan, as Larry is, as well as my other brother, Hi, and my wife, who all went to University of Georgia, and we're all Bulldogs. And I rarely would miss a game at home, one of the games in Athens. And I would remember Hi, my younger brother, calling me and asking me on a Saturday if I was working on Saturday. And this is in 1984, and I just started. I said, well, God, I sure hope so. And so I don't remember if I actually had to work that day or not, but all I remember is wanting to have enough to do to be able to work. And so I just thought, you know, through Innotrac, I'd give you some experiences. I currently sit on several boards. I'm on 4 business boards, of which they're independent from anything I do, just advise and sit on those business boards. And I'm on 2 nonprofit boards. And I've been on several boards in the past that I've rolled in and out of. Like I said, I started Innotrac in 1984. I'm a operations partner at a private equity firm called Fulcrum, which is about a $500 million private equity group. We own about 50 companies. And then I also recently, last 2.5 years, started a nonprofit biotech company in that joint venture with Harvard and Mass Eye called Odylia Therapeutics, and I run that currently. So I thought that the topic for today would be, relevant because of what's going on in not only the world right now and the economy and what's sure to come, and some of the experiences I've had since '84, coming through these things as a stronger, better organization, and just give you some ideas along with the story of how it went. So I think what I thought about this morning when I was preparing for this was really what things happened over those years since 1984 during ups and bad times that really crystallized what the company became and how it succeeded and how did it deal with adverse as well as good times. So I highlighted just a few of the critical points that I had to deal with over all those years and thought that I'd share them with you. So as I mentioned, I started in '84. I looked through the history of the company a little bit, and we started the company in a really strange time. '84, we had just come off of a big recession in 1981. We then had subsequent recessions in '86, '99, and 2008, which was the real big one. But every time I look back and I thought of those times and how we dealt with them and weathered it, how did we come out as a company? How did we come out stronger, better as a result? And I believe each time we did, and ultimately to where we sold the company. So I thought I'd share that with you. So I started in 1984. Like I mentioned, it was just me, $18,000 in the bank, scared to death. Had a tiny little office that was almost a joke. It was embarrassing, but I worked out of there, did some programming, finally hired someone to help me. But at the time, we had just come out of that '80-'82 recession, so business was really, really crummy in terms of the economy. The GDP had reduced about 8% that year, or over those 2 years, and there was almost 11% unemployment. So it was a pretty strange time to be starting a business with 2 kids and a mortgage. But I did it anyway because I just wanted to do it. So I was writing software, as I mentioned, looking for opportunities that would really just do something, solve a problem. And when we started to go, I figured, okay, well, I could write marketing software because I did have a marketing background for these large companies that were not very nimble. So I started writing software code to do marketing analysis for the large companies around Atlanta. And I realized soon that that was not a great thing. I felt like, okay, even if I was a doctor or a dentist or a lawyer, there was no leverage in that program. And it's relevant to your business because you guys are able to leverage your businesses into other businesses, meaning expand your business by having a host of people work with you. And that's part of the beauty of your business, and also what I tried to create in mine, because I didn't want to be a single programmer. I didn't want to have a group of programmers doing programming because you could only serve as many people as that one individual could by the hour or by the project. So I had an opportunity to get into a company with Turner Broadcasting and offered them, I could ship your stuff for you, all your marketing materials. And they thought that was a great idea because no one really did that service. And I charged a fee for it. So I realized now I could leverage my business. I'd write the marketing software, and then I would charge them on the distribution of the product. So that was pretty good. It worked. We trudged along. I didn't have any money, so it was really, you eat what you kill every single day. I had a few employees that I paid way before I ever paid myself. And I just remember always thinking I left my job with my father that I'd worked for a couple of years out of college, earning $40,000 a year when I left. It took me over 3 years to make back personally $40,000 in income per year. So it was a hard road, a lot of heavy hours. I was probably putting in at least 100-hour weeks for at least the first 20 years. It was a little nuts. But the company continued to grow. And then we got to a point where we were doing really well. We had companies like Siemens Energy and Automation. We had Simmons Mattress. We had a variety of large enterprise companies. But again, I looked at it and said, okay, we're doing marketing material distribution to all these companies. How many of those are there? And how many of those offices can we supply materials to? So I started thinking about the math in that, and that there were a whole lot more people or consumers in the world than there were companies. And I liked those numbers for fulfillment better than I did, working with companies directly. So we decided to pivot the business and take that opportunity and try and transition into distributing products to individuals, to people, to consumers. And we were about a $5 million company in 1990. We had grown it to that point when we did this pivot. So we started with zero, and in about 6 years, we had made it to about 5 million. So it was a tough 5 million. We were making money every year because I didn't have a choice not to. There was no credit facility available to me at the time. Nobody would give me credit. And then, of course, in 1990, we hit about $5 million, and boom, the recession of 1991 happens. So all of a sudden, every one of those clients came to me, knocked on the door, and said, hey, you got to do something for me. You got to reduce your price. You got to cut back. We've got to save ourselves. And back then, I think unemployment was about 8%. So it was an interesting time. GDP was 3 or 4% negative growth for those couple of years. And so what I decided to do is, how do I become more efficient? Rather than just give the money to the client, which I had to do because it was sort of a forced deal. What would I do? Well, I thought about it. I said, okay, well, let's take this time. Let's make ourselves better. Let's operate better. Let's train ourselves better. Let's do our fulfillment more efficiently. Let's write programs that solve problems and use less people and make our product less costly. And we came out of that. And when the recession ended, we came out of it with a better profit margin than we went in, even though we reduced our price. So I learned a lesson. I said, wow, that was really cool. And always having this continuous improvement concept was something that stayed with me from that 1990s all the way through 2015 when we sold the business. So we continued to fight through that and focus the company. I had an opportunity right around the same time to really get into a new market that we saw was interesting, which was telecommunications. Telecommunications at the time was a conglomerate owned by all AT&T, and the government broke them up as a monopoly. And so we thought that, oh, there's an opportunity. These are now all these disparate companies that are going to require some individual services, and they never were in a competitive market. So we entered into Bell South, which was based in Atlanta at the time, and we were able to start shipping phones and other telephone equipment for them for the first time. And it went okay. And then we had an idea. Actually, very few ideas are original. It's just who takes opportunities and executes on them. Someone that worked for me came up with a concept that, hey, if we're selling phones to Bell South customers, and they can also buy them at Walmart and Target, how do we make money and compete with those guys that buy in mass quantities? And he thought the idea would be, what if we sold it interest-free and billed it on the telephone bill over 10 or 12 months? And back then, phones were selling for $80 to $100. They were actually not cheap. And so we said, that's a great idea. I wrote some programs to interface with the billing system at Bell South. It took us a year to convince them to let us do it because it was a regulated phone bill. It had never been done before. It was innovative, and we had to do all the political dancing. But after a year, we did it, and it blew up. It was the most successful program they'd ever been involved in. And I never made another sales call in telecommunications. Every telephone company came to us and asked us to do it for them. So we grew the company from around 1990 to 1991 into the mid-90s, late 90s, 98, to a $250 million company with about 1,000 employees. So we're doing well. Everything was great. We finally had some debt that we were able to use for capital with a bank, but we didn't have enough because we were growing so fast. And all of a sudden, AT&T, or Southwestern Bell, out of Dallas at the time, started buying up the telephone companies and bringing them back in, and acquired the name AT&T and was doing the reverse of the merger split out. So long story short is I got a little nervous and said, oh, this is going to go away. They have an in-source capability. They're going to probably fire us at some point, and they're going to consolidate all that business back in internally. And there would be about 90% of my revenue at the time, which is now all telecommunications. So we had this idea in 1998 that we would pivot to e-commerce, which no one had heard of at the time. No one even knew what it was, but we had an opportunity. We were distributing DSL modems. And because we were distributing DSL modems, we could see the trend of increasing distribution of DSL modems to the telephone companies and realized that broadband was around the corner, and that was the enabler for e-commerce. So we jumped on it. We actually decided to go public, raised $30 million in the public market to turn into an e-commerce company. And we had a great roadshow, raised the money, spent the money to build the e-commerce platform, gave the biggest party, got a ton of clients, and guess what? Consumers weren't ready. We had pedaled fast, got ahead of the market, and we were so far ahead that nobody was there buying. So we stayed patient. We didn't panic. We still had our telecommunications business. And then, of course, that finally came to roost, and Bell South informed us through AT&T that they were leaving us. They gave us an 18-month window, but that represented about $20 million worth of profit, not revenue, profit. So we were losing $20 million of profit, and we were a little freaked out, but we did have an 18-month runway. And the first thing we did was get our operations in order. We got our administrative costs as low as possible. We renegotiated leases. We went to vendors and got better deals. We did everything we could do there. And then we invested in sales and marketing. We went out and hired the best available, and actually the best in the market in operations, as well as in sales and marketing. And we got some superstars out of that we paid for, and they produced. And we went out and started selling e-commerce to the big ones like Target and those guys. And we ended up being successful. And so we grew it back after losing that, exiting the telecommunications business, right back to where we were with about $250 million in revenue. So it was a problem that we had. We got ahead of it. We raced ahead to it and solved it. And that's part of what I want to talk about today, is really thinking about where you are today. How do you improve yourself, even in downturns or downtimes or in pauses, which I think this is, and how do you come out of that prepared to do it? And I've talked to, I sit on a board, like I mentioned, or operating partner of Fulcrum Private Equity, and we have a bunch of companies, and I've been on phone calls for the last month with them, talking to quite a few of them about how to deal with this. A lot of them, it's first time that they've been through an economic crisis. How do I deal with it? What do I do? Everything's shut down, from healthcare to restaurants, whatever it may be. And part of the advice and the thought process is, you're shut down. You can't do anything about what's happening. So in the Sidcore world, maybe stores aren't inviting you in right now. Well, that's an option that you can't change. It's not something that's in your control. But what you can be doing is thinking about how you're going to improve yourself, how you're going to approach your sales, how it's going to be better when you come out, and being ready for it. And I use the analogy of dentists and barbers. So everyone in here that's on the meeting has probably not yet been to a barber, probably not been to a dentist. But if you think about it, when this all ends, and there's going to be a glut and a onslaught of people needing to get their haircuts and going to the dentist to get clean. So those companies like that are prepared for that are going to get all the business. Otherwise, we're going to go somewhere else, right? So, and restaurants too. So restaurants who are in dire straits, well, the ones that finally have managed to survive through takeout, when everyone starts going back out to eat, there are going to be fewer restaurants, and they're going to be slammed. And at that time, they're going to come, and if they're ready for it, it's great. If they're not ready for it, it's going to be, it's gone somewhere else, and they've lost the opportunity. So in your world, and as in mine, you should think about where to go, pedal ahead of that moment, and be there waiting for it, rather than be in a position where you're reacting to it, which is the followers. So the leaders get out, get ahead of it, think about it, take this time. You've got a free pause. I look at it as an opportunity. I run a biotech company, and we're somewhat shut down. I said, guys, here's the deal. We're going to take this time, because nobody's really doing biotech unless it's for COVID-19. We don't have gene therapy moving forward right now. Everyone's on pause. So let's get better. Let's go out and make our website better. Let's go out and get our strategy better. Let's sharpen our skills. Let's get educated better. Let's do whatever we need to do. So when we come out of it, we are going to be at the starting gun. It's going to shoot, and we are going to blow out of it, and we're going to be ahead of everybody. So we have been working really hard doing that. And that's what I would recommend, whether it's a personal thing, meaning you work on your personal skills, or you work on the corporate skills and thought producing of how do you make your sales approach better? How do you capitalize on the time that you have and improve yourself? So those are a lot of the ideas that I started when we got going. Took some notes here, so let's see what we got. So, you know, we hit another, just going back to sort of my story, we had another issue that I think everyone's aware of in 2008 and 9, which was the biggest recession I've ever been through. And, you know, this one will yet to be seen, but the one in 2008 and 9 was huge. And it really caused us for the first time in all our history to be non-profitable. So, as I mentioned, we were profitable from the day I started the business because we had to be, all the way up until 2008 or 9, when the economy just went on its end due to the mortgage crisis and a variety of other things that were happening at the time. And we, you know, the big Great Recession, and we went negative for about 2 or 3 years, and we did the same thing. We sort of battled our way out of it. We reduced our costs how we could, but I specifically remember the only thing we increased our costs on were adding great salespeople and adding great marketing people to support them. And we got our marketing and sales engine so tuned up during that time that when it came back and the business started coming back, we were so far ahead of everyone else. We had pedaled ahead, knew where the market was going, and we were ready to sell it. We were ready in our operations because we actually beefed up operations in anticipation that it would be a couple of years. So we got the capacity opened up. We got better at what we were doing. We got more efficient. We took that time. We knew we were going to lose money. We couldn't help it. The infrastructure was there. The business wasn't. And when it came back, it came roaring back. And by 2012, we had exceeded our profit numbers that we were making before that recession. We then subsequently, just to give closure to the story, we got to 2013. We decided that it was time to not be public anymore, and we sold the company to private equity. I stayed involved. We then had an opportunity that I led on a competitor of ours called eBay Enterprises, which is not the main eBay. It was a division of eBay that was about $1 billion. And the private equity company and we got another one, went together and we bought eBay Enterprises, which was the oh shit moment of the dog catching the car. So we were a $250 million company, and we just bought a $1 billion company, and we went, crap, what are we going to do? And so we plugged along, another challenge, because incorporating that into what we were doing was a very different world. Fortunately, I was just on the board at that time. We hired a CEO that could handle that bigger company that I hired, and did a good job. We ultimately sold that combined entity called Radial to Belgium Post, which is it's the U.S. Post Office basically in Belgium, and they're a completely independent company. I don't have anything to do with them anymore, but they're doing fine. They're one of the leading e-commerce providers in the country, behind Amazon and Walmart. So they're really pretty cool. So my story sort of ends with what you guys can be doing and how you can think ahead. I don't know your business well enough, except, vicariously through Adam and what you do, and have always admired it and watched him build his part of the business incredibly well. And all I can tell you is this is a tough time. It's a tough time for everybody, but if you look at it as an opportunity, a pause that you can come out stronger, you will. And if you think, creatively, like, what can I do to be better? Or what can we do in product sales, or whatever angle you can think about that gives you a chance to pedal ahead and be there and be ready to do more and do more quickly when it all comes back. Because when it does come back, it's going to be an opportunistic game. Who's ready, who's prepared, and who's in the position to catch it? Otherwise, it's going to go by you and someone else is going to get it. So with that, I'll sort of open it up to see if anyone has any questions or would, thoughts.
Okay, so let's see here. Anye Mambo, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask your question. You are unmuted.
Okay, so my question, Scott, is so why was it important for you to, put in 100 hours per week for 20 years when you first started your business, and what was your mindset then?
That's a good question. So, I guess I would lean on it's a Dorfman trait more than anything else. It's just I think Adam, without a doubt, has it. My brother Larry has it, and it's really just wanting to be the best. It's an interesting question because I never dreamed of making a lot of money, which is ironic, right? So I never actually thought I was doing anything for money. I was doing it because I wanted to be the best at what I did. And it took 100 hours a week to be the best. And so I just did it because I really wanted to succeed. And success and doing something great and important to me was much more, it just never even occurred to me. And the money, it took me years to make any real money, and I had to build the business, but it was a byproduct of that thinking. So the work was just a work ethic that I think is in our genes, and you either have it or you don't. And it's a really good point because I've hired, when I had sold my business, I had 4,000 employees. And I mean, these are full-time employees that we paid, benefits and salary and everything else across the country and in Europe. And I also had, I think during peak, we'd move up to about 15,000 temp workers that would help us during seasonal peaks. And I think about the people I hired and the successes and failures, because, for sure, I didn't hire, I wasn't always right, but I learned over time what to look for in a person, both whether it's sales or finance, it didn't matter, but they always had the same core attributes. And part of that is that work ethic, number one. But number two is, first of all, you just have to look for someone that's smart. As long as, everyone on the phone is smart. So we've checked the box. So you got to be smart. A personality is very important. Being aggressive, being willing to get out there is a key to success. And resourcefulness. Those are the three. And I don't care as much about education. I never, we had some check boxes we had to hit and everything else, but I didn't put a ton on, higher education and what did you have, a master's or a college? It didn't matter. If you were smart, resourceful, and aggressive, you were going to learn it. You were going to figure it out, and you were going to be successful. And those were the three things that made someone successful. And part of that aggressiveness is wanting to be good at what you do, and that requires work. And that's just the facts of the matter. I mean, it's the American way. I hope that answered that question.
Awesome. Adam Johnson, I'm going to try and spotlight your video here and unmute you. There we go.
All right. So Scott, thanks for talking with us today. My question is what specifically for our industry would you suggest to improve efficiency and how we can operate during the downtime?
Well, I'd first bounce it to you. If I was sitting together and we were just having a question and answer session one-on-one, I'd ask you what are your impediments in your sales process? Meaning, what are the hardest things you come up against that you feel would make your sales better, or I mean, how do you look at it to start with?
So for me, I think it's self-identifying is one of the major issues that I do have. So when you ask that, what are my issues? It's almost hard to identify without having someone to reflect back off of.
Okay. Well, so when I came out of college, I worked for my dad in door-to-door sales, straight commission, no base. That was his business. It was a very similar structure to how you guys are structured. We basically had to buy or on consignment buy equipment and go out door to door to business and sell it. And if you didn't sell anything, you made nothing. And it was a numbers game. And I remember it would when I first started, the hardest thing for me to do was I only really had to make one really good sale a day to make a nice living. But it took about 30 calls and 29 no's. So, and I had to overcome that. It was really hard personally for me to say, okay, success is 1 out of 30. And so I would recommend, and I think your business is similar to that, it takes a lot. And my dad, one thing I learned from my dad is these were check writers. They're little machines that you cut money orders and stuff with. You guys are all too young to know what they are. But he always told me, he said, look, at some point, you could stand on the street corner of a busy street and hold that machine out in your hand. And if you stand there long enough, someone's going to come and ask you what it is, and you're going to tell them, and they're going to say, hey, wow, I needed one of those. And you sell it to them. The inverse to be successful is true, where you have to go out and reach out to all those guys. There it is. Okay, there's the check writer. Exactly. And reach out to all those guys and hit those numbers games. So your business, just as my business, was a numbers game. And as long as you build that, and so what I would work on is making sure you have the external shell or confidence to be able to take the rejections to get the job done. So you know how many sales you need to make or how many you want to make. And then you have to apply that to a numbers game. Say, okay, can I get better at it? Sure, I can close the gap. But at the same time, how many contacts do I make? Because if I can work hard and outwork everyone, my hero in sports is a guy named Prefontaine. I'm a long distance runner, have been all my life. He was a very small white guy for running, which is very unusual in the long distance running game back in the 70s. And he wrote an autobiography that I loved. And his one thing said, I don't have the most skill. I don't have the most athletic body, but I'm the world champ because I can take more pain and work harder than everybody. And I loved it. It was my biggest, coolest moment and that's why he was my sports hero. It's because he didn't have all the talent and he wasn't the best physically in the world, but he won the world records because he was willing to endure more pain and work harder than anyone. So that's sort of a cool thing. So you can work on that shell. You can work on how do you take, if rejection's a problem, which I think it is for everybody, but you do the math, you make it objective and say, okay, I've got to talk to 100 people to get 3 to buy. If that's the number, I don't know your business well enough, but if that's the number, then commit to doing 120 a day. Just outwork it. So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Our next person I'm going to call in here is Okello. So give me one. I'm going to spotlight video and unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I can.
Perfect. So you did mention that you really, the drive for you was the strive to be the best. So my follow-up question to that is, when you ran into difficult times when you didn't have success, how did you adjust your strategies to improve? And was there any system that you used that was consistent throughout those times, those difficult times where you weren't having the success that you wanted?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would tell you that there's a couple of thoughts to that. One is I was believed in a lot, respecting everybody in my organization. And we had a phenomenal culture, actually similar to what Adam's built in his company. And I was really proud of it, but it wasn't an easy culture, meaning we required quite a bit. And I led with that, meaning I was the guy that was hardest on myself first and then pushed that down to everybody else. And I really led by example. So I really never required anyone to do anything that I was not willing to do myself. And I was always on the front lines and made certain that that was the example that I set for the company. And this is a really interesting point. And it's a really cool little side story anecdote. So my youngest 2 children, Corey and Joni, who are 19, are at Emory. And when we went for opening day or whatever, at the beginning of the year, the freshmen, I was at the headmaster or the president of Emory's house for a little cocktail party at the end. And a guy comes over to him and he says, "You don't know me, but I know you really well." I said, "Oh, cool." He says, "Yeah, I used to work for you." I said, "Oh, wow. When?" He says, "Oh, back in the early 90s. I said, "No way." And he was a executive at Emory at that time and now. And he says, "But I just remember you motivated me in a way that I've told my wife and I've led my life." And I said, what was that? He says, "Well, it was a horrible snow day and there was snow everywhere and no one got into work. And I was called in by my boss to come in, and I worked in finance. And I came in, and when I got there, I finally got in and there was hardly anyone there. And he sent me out into the warehouse to ship orders. And I bitched and moaned. I said, "That's not my job. I don't ship orders." And he says, "This is what we're doing today to get the orders out." And I went out on the floor and I looked down the aisle and there were you sitting there packing orders. I said, "I don't remember that." And he says, "Yeah, but you know what? What drove me." And so I take that as, the answer to the question is lead by example. Follow people that you want to lead and watch that are successful. And generally, they don't have to tell you what to do. You can just see them do it.
Love that. Kim from Dallas, you are next. I'm going to spotlight your video here. Go ahead.
Hi,
Hello.
Scott. So I have a question. So how did you keep going even during the times when, things are so unsure? Like I know you mentioned when you just started the business, you had 3 kids, you have a mortgage to pay, and you don't know if you're going to be good at your business. So how did you, keep going?
Well, I had, that's a good question. The only skill I had was I was a computer programmer, and I'll be honest with you, I did what I call hacking. I was hired by some parents to teach their children, I think they were middle school or elementary, how to program DOS, which was like, back in the old days. And I hated it more than anything. And I would go to their houses once or twice at night a week to earn, I think I got paid $75 an hour or something. And I hated it. They were like horrible kids. They were wealthy kids and they were just brats. And I just hated it, but it was the only way I could pay bills. And it's the same point that I have when someone's out of work and they're not willing to do whatever is necessary to put food on the table until they get the opportunity. So I always just think about it like, okay, well, if you have to do something at night, do it. I mean, don't sit on your hands. Make sure you're motivated, because what it does is your work ethic is your work ethic. If you're shut down during the day, work at night. If you're shut down at night, do whatever you have to do. And if you have a skill, do it. If you don't have a skill, go find something to do. There's no excuses not to have something to do out there.
Awesome. I'm going to get our friend Mike Iorio next. Mike is up in Portland, Oregon.
Hey, Mike.
Thanks for getting on with us. You mentioned resourcefulness, smart, aggressive, and work ethic as 3 of the things. I wonder if you might expand on what resourcefulness means to you. I heard you say a couple things that stood out to me, but I'm curious on your take on what resourcefulness means.
Yep. And I do have a specific definition of that. That's a really great question, because to me, it's sort of figuring out how to do it. So I used to, when I had people work for me, if I would say, hey, let's go, this is a really good strategy, let's go figure this out, or let's go do this. And they had to come back to me and ask me exactly how to do it. They didn't have resourcefulness. So and this is a relevant question to sales, because it was sort of how I approach sales. We're really efficient in our sales and marketing. And the reason for that is I targeted. I didn't believe in a real scattered approach. I like to target. So I would hire, not only for every salesperson, we had a research assistant, and that research assistant would go out, because we were selling enterprise people. So keep in mind that it was a different business, but we would research each company that we wanted to do business with and know everything about them, everything about their business. We knew if they liked wine or golf or where they were, what they did, anything we could find out, we'd find out. And those research analysts were good because they were resourceful. And that meant that, like, okay, if we ask you to get on the phone and go on the internet and find out about a company and who the buyer is, you've got to be resourceful. And the definition of that is by being able to figure it out, being able to, change your path a little bit, be resourceful, be creative, and get to the end goal. And that's what entrepreneurs are anyway. And almost every person that's successful in sales is resourceful. And that means you are in the middle of your presentation and you change it because you get a cue from your prospect. And being resourceful is doing that, is not just staying in rote, not just continuing your pitch, even when you hear signals, but keeping that sort of back of your mind and your ear open so that you're listening while you're talking. And if you can react to what the body cues and the language that your customer or prospect is giving you at the time, then you tailor your presentation. That's resourcefulness.
Awesome. Thomas Jenkins is going to be our next question. There you go, Thomas. You're muted.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Scott?
Yeah. Yep. Sure can.
Thanks for taking your time out of your day. My question is, who was your biggest influence during the hard times, like 08, 09, when you said you were going like 2-3 years without making any money? And what was the most important you took from them?
Say that again. I'm sorry. My biggest influencer.
During those tough times like 08, 09, or any recessions that you
Yeah.
And then what was the most important thing that you took from them?
Okay. Yeah, I can point to that pretty easily. So, I'm extremely competitive. Like I said, I want to be the best. And so being competitive is also part of the best. So I learned a really interesting lesson from someone that I admire tremendously today as well. And I can actually point back earlier in time why that was important in 2008. But in 1999, I had just gone public. And without getting into too much graphic detail, I was in the shower. And back in 1999, you had these little shower radios. And I'd listen to the business news in the morning while I showered and got ready for work. And they had Jeff Bezos on, who had just gone public about 2 months before me with Amazon. And they were beating him up about when is he going to make money? When is he going to be profitable? Because they've invested so much money. And he got up on the podium and he said, and I'm listening to him on the radio, I'm sitting butt naked in the shower. And I hear him say, well, I'm not so short-sighted and small-minded to worry about making profit. And I start screaming at the radio because I'm, that like dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. How stupid is that? And of course I was the stupid one, right? He was a brilliant man, had a much bigger picture of the world. So as 2008 comes along, Amazon is doing fine. He's built an empire. He's built a marketplace that didn't exist. He's done all kinds of wonderful things. And I thought back about that guy and always said, okay, you're not always right, meaning me. There's somebody that really knows better, and you got to listen to the signs. And then number two, stay your path. Because if you know one thing about Jeff, what he did do is he kept going. He hunkered down, did what he had to do, and look where he is today. And he went through some tough times, and he's now the wealthiest man in the world. And I admire him for sticking with it and having a vision that he didn't derail, but he did change it as he needed to. And during those times, I look back at making sure I pedaled ahead like he did. And that's sort of where I got that concept of pedaling ahead is, he looked at that moment. I just remember, and I tell this story all the time because I was so wrong and he was so right. I'm yelling at a radio and the guy was so right. And so I've learned my lesson that, okay, just because I don't agree with someone doesn't mean he's not totally right and I'm totally wrong.
I love that. This is Shalon from up in Charlotte.
Hello.
Hi, good morning. No, afternoon. I don't know where you are, so.
He's in
I'm in
Alabama.
Alabama.
Okay, well, same time then, Atlanta. Awesome. So my question for you is, I'm like really big on people's stories and the things that they've been through, and I think yours is fascinating, and I love hearing about like the ups and downs that people have in their lives and how they overcome it. So when was a situation that you thought, like, this is it, I just can't move forward, or like the biggest obstacle, or like the most difficult maybe day of your career, if you can remember? I'm sure it's more than one. And how did you overcome it, and how did you feel after that?
All right. Well, I can give you two that could have been catastrophic. And the first one started, 84. It was probably in 87 or 1988 or whatever. And we were doing work for Southwestern Bell. And we were for their silver pages, doesn't really matter, like a yellow pages. And it was programming mostly. And I was the programmer. And I remember getting a call from them, and we were a small company. And the lady called me from St. Louis, where they were based at the time, and said, "You've screwed up." And we did something in the database that we sent, and they did a mailing, and someone cashed in like $1 million coupon of an existing customer when it was meant to be another customer. And I went, "Oh my God, I don't know, like that's going to put me out of business." And she said, "I hope you have good insurance." That was her answer to me. And I went home, and Adam will like this. I don't know if it was bourbon or scotch, Adam, but it was one of the two. And I didn't back then drink alcohol. I drank beer. And I poured this giant glass, whatever that was. And I just sat there and I drank it. And I went to sleep, and I had a habit of, I'm a bad sleeper. And I had a habit of solving problems always during the night, or it's one of my probably good and bad traits, is I always solve the problem. So whatever the problem is, I work it in my head till I at least have an answer or something to do with it. It's not always right, but I make a decision. And I remember laying awake all night thinking about it and working the problem. And even when I was a programmer, if I ran into a moment where I couldn't get a program to work, I just go to sleep, work on it overnight, wake up, think about it again, and finally get it. So this one I worked on all night. I thought about everything that could have gone wrong. I got up early in the morning, went in the office, got on my computer, started digging in, wrote some programs to analyze some stuff, and realized that the guy was a fraud, that we didn't do anything wrong. He was trying to take advantage of Southwestern Bell, and I wrote a big report, gave him all the data, and it got me out of it. So that was one where I just worked through it and solved the problem. And I'm a big believer in solving problems. And whether you solve them correctly or not, you have to have an answer. So even in today's world right now, there are problems to be solved, meaning in your own business. Solve the problem, work it out, figure it out. It may not be the right answer, but but make a decision. And if you make the wrong decision, you know what you should do? Think about it, make another decision. But by making no decisions in your life and making no decisions in your business is never going to get you anywhere. So I'd rather see you make some mistakes, solve the problem. So I did do that. I solved the problem in that case. The second time was another case where it was a different programmer much later in our business. We're a much bigger company, and it was about a $10 million mistake, which we actually did make. And I looked at it, thought real hard about it, took the programming out myself and verified that we made the mistake and didn't really know what to do. And it may not have put us out of business, but it would have been really, really devastating. And I just looked at my executives, and there was one guy that was just perfect for it. He had come out of the same business, and I asked him to work through the problem with me. We worked it out. We came up with a plan. He went and approached them with it, told them exactly what happened, and whatever happened, but it was the craziest thing. They forgave the error and extended our contract. And so the only thing I did right was work the problem with them and pick the right guy to go deliver the message. So that was another time.
And I got, let's see here, Adrian Hyde. I'm going to call on for Adrian. Let's spotlight that video.
Hey, Adrian.
Hey, Scott, how you doing?
I call on Adrian for the haircut.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, say, you know, you and Adam are in the right place, man. You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, we have the same barber.
Yeah.
Weird. I shave in the shower. Go ahead.
Well, my question that I had was, you know, obviously, you know, do you feel like with the success of other family members, did that have something that, you know, did that play a role in your drive for, you know, pushing yourself to, you know, work hard, do 100 hours a week or whatever the case may be?
Not individually within my family. So Larry and I, Adam's dad and I are best friends, and we ridiculously live next door to each other in Atlanta, and down here where I am in Alabama, we have houses next door to each other as well, and we're extremely close. We're each other's, you know, back, so to speak. So we didn't compete with each other and family members. We just both had this desire to be the best at what we did, whatever it was, and whoever it was with. And you know, Larry and I jokingly call it, and my wife does too, the Dorfman gene. And Adam definitely got that same gene. Some of the Dorfmans don't have it; they got, you know, the other side. But the genetic side of it, which Adam, Larry, and myself all have, is highly competitive, very resourceful. Do whatever you have to do to get it done, or, you know, put your head through a wall if you have to.
So we're pretty much out of time. Do you have any final thoughts of anything you'd want to share? We've got about 450 people on the call. We've got some people watching on YouTube. Most of these are young entrepreneurs or people who work in the offices. And this is, for a lot of these people, this is really the first major thing that they've been through as an adult, right? So you know, the 0809, they remember hearing about it, but for the most part, they were kids, right? They weren't steering the ship, they were just passengers. Same thing when 9/11 happened. Same thing with, I mean, a lot of the people that are on this call were born after, 1996. And so what advice do you have for young people in their 20s and 30s? And we've got people who are a little older, people who are a little younger. Final thought for people who are going through the first kind of major life-changing, I will never forget where I was moment. And as you're in the business and leading a team through this.
Well, so great question, Adam. And I would tell you that think of yourself because as a mini business. So just all the advice I gave you from a company standpoint and what Adam may be doing, you should do individually, right? So, this is a time not to be pausing your mind, and it's not necessarily a moment to be pausing your body. You should be working hard, stay in shape, stay aggressive, stay sharp, do whatever you have to do to keep your mind sharp. And then at the same time, you ought to be looking at your own house. And I mean, your own administration personally and your personal expenses and decide, okay, well, what's the worst case that could happen? Meaning in terms of time, like if this thing doesn't go, if we open up in June, great. What does that mean to me? But what if we don't open till August, meaning get back in the stores? What am I going to do come August, between now and August? And that might mean that you really have to be resourceful in figuring out what your costs are, not to spend too much, just hunker down, do what you got to do. But at the same time, build yourself up, get out there, be productive. Don't get complacent, because when you come back, if you've learned to be complacent and sat on the couch and played video games, you're not going to be ready to go. So there are things you can do. You can get online. You can, if you have colleagues at Sidcor, you can jump on them and pitch each other. I mean, there's a lot of things you can be doing to hone your skills and not get complacent. So I do believe that that's the one thing that people do. And I'm going to tell you one final story, Adam, then I know we'll all go, because I think it's most indicative of where we are today. So when I started my business, there was a company called Stesi Direct. And Stesi Direct was the leader in Atlanta in what we did in marketing services. And the guy was a rock star, did really, really well. And I had very little contact with him. He was I wanted to always be like that company. Fast forward 25 years later, I get a call from Joe Stesi. Never met him before. He says, Scott, I've watched your career. Things are great with you. You've done a great job. I said, oh, thanks. I appreciate it. He says, look, I'm really struggling. Can you help me? I said, sure. I mean, what's going on? He says, oh, the business, I just can't do anything. There's no business out here. Can you throw me any business? I said, well, what are you doing? And he listed all the stuff, and it was the exact same stuff that he was doing 25 years before. And he had not improved any skills. I said, well, Joe, why didn't you get into these things? He says, I don't know. I was doing okay there. And so obviously he was out of work, and he didn't adapt. He didn't change. So this is a time to adapt, to change, to hone your skills, stay sharp, and don't miss out. I mean, you guys are young, you're energetic. I'd love to be like you guys. I mean, it's exciting.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm going to do what we do at the conclusion of all of these calls. I'm going to put our video back to gallery view, unmute everybody. To
Thank you.
Thanks.
So much.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Show your feelings for a second and be like, please